Thank you for the invitation to share a little bit on giving hope in a time of uncertainty. You know, vocation directors are one of the most hopeful people that I know. Yet at this time, we can lose hope. One of my favorite scriptural verses comes from the first letter of Peter, chapter 3, verse 15. Always have a reason for the hope you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. And of course, from the prophet Jeremiah, for I know well the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper and not harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. My search for signs of hope began when I was a novice, partly because I found myself defending the audacious decision to enter religious life at a time when there weren't many others doing so. I began to realize that I had simply fallen in love with God and chose to respond to God's call in a way of life that was filled with uncertainty. I couldn't explain in words or give practical reasons for my choice to become a sister, but I knew it wasn't a passing phase, a careless thought, or a frivolous decision. So I began to search for signs of hope, and along the way, I recognized my own role in being a sign of hope. Early on, I was pretty naive and even questioned why so well-meaning sisters advised me to pray the Salve Regina daily for the grace of perseverance. Truth be told, I didn't know the Hail Holy Queen by heart in English or Latin when I entered religious life. So I became curious and sought out our oldest sisters to share their stories of hope and perseverance. When you hope, you are vulnerable. Hope keeps me lighthearted because when I hope, I can appear foolish. I can also become more guarded and more cautious. So today, I'd like to share with you on what keeps me focused on hope. First, I know that God is our creator. God creates beauty every day, and it's up to me to notice. Like this verse in the Gospel of Mark, so often I take for granted that the seeds will grow, the flowers will bloom, and the sun will rise. Richard Rohr writes in The Universal Christ, everything visible without exception is the outpouring of God. And Sister Ilia Delio writes this, we live in an unfinished universe. Life is not behind us, but ahead of us. God is not finished with us. God has all the time in the world to create and enjoys the process of creation itself. We are being created and religious life is being created. Emphasis, therefore, is not on what exists, but on what is being created. That is, on the dynamics of relatedness. Pope Francis said in his homily on hope on March 27th in front of a rainy St. Peter's Basilica before an empty square, we have all realized that we are on the same boat, all of us fragile and disoriented. But at the same time, important and needed, all of us are called to row together, each of us in need of comforting the other. We have realized that we cannot go on thinking of ourselves, but only together can we do this. You know, it was my novice director, and I'm sure it was yours as well, who was the first to advise me, when you can't control what's happening or your circumstances, remember, you always have a choice in your attitude. Hope is a choice. Choose hope. 2 weeks later, in his homily at the Easter Vigil, Pope Francis spoke these words, tonight, we acquire a fundamental right that can never be taken away from us, the right to hope. It is a new and living hope that comes from God. It is not mere optimism. It is not a pat on the back or an empty word of encouragement with a passing smile. No, it is a gift from heaven which we could not have earned on our own. Over these weeks, we have kept repeating all will be well, clinging to the beauty of our humanity and allowing words of encouragement to rise up from our hearts. But as the days go by and fears grow, even the boldest hope can dissipate. So let us not give in to resignation. Let us not place a stone before hope. We can and must hope because God is faithful. Dear sister, dear brother, even if in your heart you have buried hope, do not give up. God is greater. So how can we be these signs of hope? I think it's important that we get perspective. What you see depends upon what you look for. These photos of my dad, who lives in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, come from 2 years ago and last year at this time. I realized during this pandemic that I would not be able to visit him for Easter. And so it was a call during Lent when he called me and he said, "Deb, are you sitting down?" I said, "Dad, yes." I didn't know what he was going to say. And he quietly spoke these words. Never, ever in my lifetime did I ever think that the bishop would cancel all the parish fish fries. And there was silence. See, growing up in the city of Pittsburgh, parish fish fries on Fridays were everybody in the neighborhood went to. It didn't matter if you were Catholic or any other faith tradition. And yet for my dad, going to the fish fries was where you saw your neighbors. And he couldn't believe that during this pandemic, when the fish fries began to close, he began to realize how serious this pandemic was. The picture on the right is him at Easter last year when I was home. See, my dad, he taught me to dwell on what's possible, and he chooses hope. Now during the pandemic, because I haven't been home to see him, I talk to him daily on the phone. See, there's two extremes, and they're opposites during this pandemic. One extreme tells us total unbelief. This is a hoax, this is a conspiracy. And the other extreme says, this will never, ever end. All events are canceled indefinitely. But let's go back for some perspective. Think back a century ago, in 1920. Now, I know most of us weren't alive in 1920, I'm certain of it, but how did we use transportation, education, healthcare, communication, formation? Think about all the changes we have faced that have been a part of our lives and what we've lived into. We are living into another shift of priorities of our time, how we live community, how we use our finances, and how we communicate. Can we as religious be a part of this change? Because we have so much to share with the world on how to live authentically as a community, how to live simply in solidarity with the poor. For a new perspective, consider answering the following. What adventures await us? What adventures await us? For my dad, he's looking forward to planting the peas and the spinach. For me, I'm looking forward to when I can drive home and visit him and my sisters in Pennsylvania. My narrative of hope says, take it one day at a time. Focus on what we can do today. Because for some, this is the worst of times. They can name loved ones with the virus. They know people who are working with people who have the virus. And they know friends who have lost their jobs because of shelter-in-place orders. For some, it's just an inconvenience and a disruption. Yet worry, fear, and even doubt grows daily as we watch updates, look at images, and shift into a new way of living. Someone wrote another perspective on Pope Francis's image of being in the same boat, but not in the same storm. It says, we are all in the same boat, We are not all in the same storm. For some people, it's sprinkling. This is a break, a breather. It's a pause in the normal. It's a time to reconnect with family and community and slow down. Honestly, it's kind of peaceful. For some, it is a storm. It's a bit scary. It's disruptive. It's enough to make you stay up and watch the news and worry. For some, it's a hurricane. It's tearing at the boards and pulling off the root. It's washing them out to sea. It's dark and unknown. It's life-changing. It's not wrong to enjoy the sprinkles or enduring the storm, but don't minimize the hurricane engulfing your neighbor. So laugh at the memes and get on your knees in prayer. Then reach out to your neighbor to help. So here's a practical suggestion when hope is lost. Make 2 lists. On the left side say why we can't, and on the right side say how we can. So for example, a personal dream, a personal task is, when can I visit my family? Well, if I focus on why I can't, it makes sense. The World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control want us to shelter at home. I may be a carrier and can infect my dad unintentionally if I go home. Or I may become infected if I stop off at a rest stop along the way. If I stay in the why we can't, I can become paralyzed and hopeless. However, if I shift my thinking to how I can, and think about, this is an opportunity to call my dad each day, something that I've never done in my life. We've had some meaningful conversations because we both had a little extra time to talk and to listen to one another. My dad's the one that started this. He was going through a box of cards he found in one of the shelves, and he told me he didn't have a card to send to me for Easter, so instead he sent me an anniversary card, and we laughed about it. And since then, he sent me a Halloween card and a Valentine's Day card. But it gives me an opportunity to find new ways to communicate with him if I can't visit him in person. I can also ask my sisters to help. They're a part of the group that's sewing masks for everyone at the state hospital and the local medical center. So I reached out and said, could you send him a mask? And it made his day. So how do we not lose hope when we come to promoting vocations? Because for so many, all the events have been canceled. We know that sheltering in place limits our travel, and meeting with inquirers face-to-face is unsafe. We can fall into the attitude that everything is futile if we only focus on, will anyone ever enter during this pandemic? So I encourage you to shift your thinking into what you can do, how you can do it. This is a time we could read more. Look at the Horizon archives. Look at the 2020 study. This could be a time we can increase our social media presence, learn more about Zooming like this recorded talk, or WhatsApp. We can also be a sign of hope for others who are despairing. So it all comes down to, during this pandemic, what are you motivated by? Are you motivated by fear, worry, or hope? During this pandemic, what brings you hope? Be that, do that, and share that. I came up with these 4 ideas of what can we do during the pandemic as vocation directors: pray, organize, educate, and recreate. Publicize your prayer, especially your communal prayer. We know that sharing our spirituality and community life can change the perception people have of us as religious. It's amazing. Any scroll down social media, you hear people sharing, praying the Liturgy of the Hours together, praying chaplets and rosaries, and the Angelus bells ringing. Be a part of that and publicize and magnify our digital footprint. The young are not going online, they're living online. And can they find us where they already are? Our 2020 study reported that it is the charism, community life, prayer life, living the gospel values, and the way the vows are lived are what most influences discerners to enter their religious institute. How can we magnify each one of those aspects online? Organize. So now's the time to get all those photos off your phone. Update your contact information. Update your Vision Vocation Match profile. Update or finally get time to create that job description for leadership team to approve, and update candidate applications and release forms. It's also time to organize the closets, which we have no time when we keep putting more and more stuff on the shelves. Now's the time to take it off the shelves and sort through what do you really need and what is it you can donate and what is it that you know that you can get rid of. This is a time to spend in educating yourself and your community members. As I mentioned earlier, go through the Horizon archives, pick a topic out, and come up with some ideas and suggestions to learn some more information. Read a book and pass it along. Read the NRVC 2020 study, all 150 pages of it. It's also important that we spend time recreating. Taking daily walks, whether that means inside or outside, and being creative in how we exercise. My own community has started to share recipes, the most treasured recipes that we have from our sisters. So now might be the time to bake a little and share those recipes. We've heard many people building puzzles, write postcards, sing and dance it out. One of our sister Suzanne said to me, now is the time to luxuriate. I thought that was interesting, but what she was saying is embrace this time of pausing. So Henry Nouwen, he wrote this reflection. He said, a man or woman without hope in the future cannot live creatively in the present. Hope means to keep living amid desperation and to keep humming in the darkness. Hoping is knowing that there is love, it is trust in tomorrow. It is falling asleep and waking again when the sun rises. In the midst of the gale of the sea, it is to discover land. In the eyes of another, it is to see that you are understood. As long as there is still hope, there will also be prayer, and you will be held in God's hands. As you know, the NRVC 2020 study on recent vocations to religious life was released on the Feast of the Annunciation, and it really is a study of hope. We know that there's a mystery in the call and unpredictability in response. And the scriptures are full of stories of call, and each generation finds new ways to follow Christ. The data in this study can be a springboard for meaningful conversations with your community to make vocation a priority for the entire church. This study surveyed over 3,500 women and men who entered religious life in the United States between 2003 and 2018. Of the 752 religious institutes in the United States, we received responses from over 500 institutes. I'd like to share a little sneak peek of this study with you. Women and men are still being called by God and are still entering religious life today. They have their own stories of call filled with doubt, anxiety, joy, hope, and even fear of what this could mean. Discerners are entering a variety of religious institutes and societies of apostolic life with varying spiritualities, missions, and charisms. Matter of fact, the majority of religious institutes in the United States have at least one person in initial formation. One newer member wrote, I hope to be able to live the rest of my life in this congregation, being faithful to the vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. I also hope to help the most needy and marginalized. Newer members are attracted to the spirituality, charism, mission, prayer life, and community life than they are to our geographic location, the size of our institute, or the ages of our members. Matter of fact, both studies indicate that it's the example of our members that are more influential than the ministries of our religious institutes. Likewise, meeting with members of the institute was rated as the highest, as the most helpful when discerning a call to religious life in both studies. Newer entrants rated the helpfulness of members of their religious institute in vocation discernment higher than talking with their pastors, using websites, social media, and even meeting with the vocation director. Now's the time to encourage our members to invite people to consider a vocation to religious life. One newer member wrote, "I visited the sisters and then I just sat across from one. I saw the joy in her eyes. I said, 'That's nothing you can fake.' I was like, 'What is that?' And I started asking the deeper questions." One of our well-used excuses on not accepting new vocation centers around age. Matter of fact, 79% of those in initial formation are under the age of 39 or younger. You'll hear, "What does a 30-something have in common with me, a senior citizen?" Or, "I just don't think it's fair to accept candidates because there's too big of an age gap." Does it sound familiar? Well, would it surprise you to learn that 96% of newer members rated the care and support of elderly members as the highest when evaluating their religious institutes? And would it surprise you to learn that 93% of newer members prefer to live in communities with members of different ages? This report indicates that in the United States, 13% of religious are under the age of 60, and 13% are aged 90 and older. And guess what? Newer members know this before they enter. Really, they do. Newer members desire members of all ages to be committed to living the charism more vibrantly, with a greater effort to live in solidarity with the poor and marginalized. And unlike previous generations to religious life, they recognize that stewardship involves divesting of empty buildings, underutilized property, and sponsored institutions to live more simply, utilizing human and material resources to benefit the neediest. In a time of right sizing, this is hopeful information, as they are not afraid to let go of buildings and institutions, perhaps because they have no memory of these sacred spaces filled to capacity. In religious life today, major superiors are most concerned about strengthening peer support among newer members. Whereas major superiors are concerned, newer members already know where to find peers through intercongregational events from their discernment throughout their formation. So let's look back for a moment on what newer members said about who encouraged them to discern a vocation to religious life, and what this tells us about what we need to include in initial formation as points of support and encouragement. Looking at this particular graph, we recognize that during their initial discernment, new members received the most encouragement from members of their own institute, their vocation director or team, and their spiritual director. With the exception of members of their institute, all other support has decreased since 2009. What is interesting about this particular statistic is that friends and parishioners are more likely to encourage people in discernment and newer members than their own families. So how can we change discernment and formation approaches to include their friends and to include parishioners? Newer members are filled with abundant hope amidst changing demographics. They recognize that for most, our communities are getting smaller with aging members, yet their hope is pragmatic and audacious. Although cognizant of their challenges and concerns expressed by major superiors, newer members are more hopeful, perhaps because they recognize their own role in creating a future for their institute. And so I'd like to end with this excerpt from Christus Vivit, number 142, on how we can be signs of hope and not lose our hope. It says, "Keep following your hopes and dreams, but be careful about one temptation that can hold us back. It is anxiety. Anxiety can work against us by making us give up whenever we do not see instant results. Our best dreams are only obtained through hope, patience, and commitment, and not in haste. At the same time, we should not be hesitant, afraid to take chances or make mistakes. Avoid the paralysis of the living dead who have no life because they're afraid to take risks or to make mistakes or to persevere in their commitments. Even if you make mistakes, you can always get up and start over. For no one has the right to rob you of hope. Again, I want to thank you for this time of sharing, and know that you can download the entire NRVC study on our website. We purposely made it available to the public and its supporting materials. We have an infographic as well as a colorful booklet, and we'll also be enrolling other areas to help you with this study. Let us continue to keep one another in prayer to end the spread of this global virus, and know that we are here as an NRVC staff and board to help you. Thank you.